Today we're going to talk about the technique that John Frusciante uses to get the percussive sound of the Cant stop riff. We'll learn the riff as well. Stick around. Hello everyone, it's James from Practice Like a Pro, providing you with simple clear guitar tips to help you on your guitar playing journey. Today we're going to talk about the riff for Cant Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's a riff that I constantly get asked to teach my one-to-one students, and a lot of people have a go online but don't get the percussive technique right, and it just sounds really flubby and weird. So we're going to break it down and have a quick look at it. I'll put a timestamp to the riff because we need to talk about the technique first. If you've already got the technique down and just want the notes, please feel free to skip ahead. So let's just have a look at the sound that we're going for. So this is the Red Hot Chili's riff. So it's quite an obnoxious sounding riff. So I'll talk about tone a little bit later on and how I'm getting the sound, but apologies if there's any kind of buzzing and stuff like that. I decided to plug the big Marshall in and use that today. So try to get a little bit more authentic. So if you hear a couple of crackles and pops, that's what that is. So it looks like there's a lot going on, and the main thing with it is that he's playing one note but striking all 6 strings and muting the other 5. Now, when we get into the bass end of the strings, sometimes he's only muting the bottom 4 strings and he's not sort of passing through all of them. When we get to the riff a little bit later in the lesson, we'll talk about that. But the technique it comes from sort of like 70s disco and even like funk and James Brown and that kind of stuff. You'll hear, I'm trying to think of a great example. I Want You Back by the Jackson 5. So the guitarist plays 2 A flats and he mutes the rest of the strings. So I'm touching all 6 strings and the 2 notes that I want. I'm striking all 6 strings. If I weren't muting, I'd get this, which is obviously not what we want. So the only difference between that and what John Frusciante is doing is he's only playing one note at a time, but he's muting all 6. So to start with, we're going to press the 5th fret on the A string. Now I'm going to press that with my index finger, and then I'm going to use this part of my finger to touch the rest of the strings to stop them ringing out. Now you'll get a little bit of noise, but that's what we're going for. Now, the second option for the low E string, you can either use the tip of your index finger to touch it to stop it ringing out, or what I like to do is I like to put my thumb over the top of the neck and just rest it on the string. So where my thumbprint is, I rest it on the string. So once you've got your fingers all in the right place for that, all I want you to do is strike all 6 strings for me. Now, you will be getting a percussive. You will hear some of the reverberations of the other strings that aren't as well muted as the others, but that's kind of the point. It doesn't want to be super clean. You think of the riff and it's really kind of dirty and rough around the edges, and it's an art to get it sounding that way without making it sound rubbish. So what I want you to do is I just want you to play that in crotchets for me. Now also notice I'm using my 3rd finger to stop. After we've played for a crotchet, I'm stopping the strings from ringing out rather than just going. A great habit to get into, especially for this staccato kind of hopping around riff, is stopping the strings from muting. Sorry, stopping the string from ringing out, should I say. So to move that technique on a little bit further, what we're going to do is we're just going to play a C major scale on that A string, and each note we're going to go to the next degree of the scale. So the C major scale, fret 3, fret 5, fret 7, fret 8, fret 10, fret 12, fret 14, fret 15. There'll be the tab on screen for you. And all I want you to do is exactly the same technique, but each time you play a note, I want you to move to the next degree of the scale. Now, fortunately, I'm on a you know, you see I'm playing a Stratocaster in true John Frusciante fashion. If you get sort of more towards the dusty end and you'd rather use your second or your third fingers, that's completely cool. And I don't know if you can hear, I'm really bashing the strings. If you're too gentle, you get more of what we call a rake, which is, you hear it in. I'm not striking all the strings at the same time, there's just that little pause and you hear that. We don't want that, you want to hit it with some gusto so that it's one clean sort of consistent sound rather than, we don't want that. Short, staccato and choppy is what we're looking for. So once you've got that, let's have a go with the A minor pentatonic. Now we're only going to use the first octave of it, so 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7. And this almost reminds me of a little bit of a Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of vibe. If you've heard a song called Rude Mood, it sort of sounds like that. Obviously it'll be a different key, probably E flat if it's Stevie Ray Vaughan. All we're going to do is we're going to play the notes ascending the first octave, but I'm going to do that striking all 6 strings and muting the others. So this conjures up another problem of while you're moving over strings. Now let's start with the low E string. So we've got fret 5 on the low E. I just mute the other 5 strings with my index finger there. And you'll be forgiven for not hitting the 2 highest strings. To be honest, looking at it from this angle, I'm only really catching the low E, the A, the D and the G. Whichever's fine. So we're only going to play one of those. Then you're going to come up with your little finger and do the same. Now this is probably the most challenging thing of the whole lesson, is being able to fret that 8th fret on the low E and mute the rest of it with your pinky. Now you might hear a couple of strings kind of bleeding out ever so slightly, and it's more of a kind of palm mute effect than a dead string. Just roll with it, you will get more confident. It's like learning to play with that little finger anyway, it just takes time. So we've got 5, 8, now we're going to move to the A string, so this is familiar territory from the previous exercises. So again, I'm going to press the 5th fret of the A string. I'm going to use the tip of my index finger to stop that low E ringing out, and then I'm just going to touch the rest of the strings. Now, I should have said this a lot earlier, forgive me, but if you press down too hard, you're almost getting an accidental bar chord, which is not what we want. You just want to touch them enough to stop them from vibrating. So we've got 5, and then with this 3rd finger we're going to go to 7, and it's same sketch. Now to be honest, with my low E string, my thumb's probably doing a lot of the heavy lifting for that low E string. And then can you see me arching my 3rd finger over that's stopping the other strings from ringing out? So we've got 5, 8, 5, 7, and then we're going to do 5, 7 again. Now, you can come backwards as well, just to get a bit more mileage out of that exercise. A great modification for that, before we move on to the proper riff that we're going to look at today. Alternate, do down and up strokes. Now you can see me being really, I'm over exaggerating those motions, and that's just because of the format that we're learning on today. If I wasn't being watched, I'd probably be a little bit more reserved with my strumming hand. More. And outside of Can't Stop, I hear John Frusciante do a lot of these kind of, especially like in the earlier Red Hot Chili Peppers stuff that he did with them. There's a lot of these scruffy kind of riffs, and then the sound a bit scruffy, but just enough So there's just enough quality in there. He's a fantastic player. He's one of the greatest sort of guitar players of that sort of era, in my opinion. But there's a fine line between sort of making it sound scruffy so it sounds cool and it sounding scruffy for poor technique. And this is something that I really, really need to hammer home for you. Now, do bear in mind, I'm using a big Marshall in the bridge pickup on a Strat. It is supposed to sound nasally because that's the sound of the record. So now would be a good time to talk about gear before we get into the riff. John Frusciante is well known for playing 60s era Strats. He has a few of them. So this is a 62 reissue. I think it's a Mexican 60s reissue, but with a lacquered, with nitro lacquer instead of polyurethane. He's known for using, his main rig from my research is a Marshall Silver Jubilee, which is like if I remember correctly, is like an 800 era kind of amp. And he also uses what's called a Marshall Major as well, which is like a ridiculous 200 watt plexi, used by guys like Richie Blackmore, was famous for using a Marshall 200. So we're looking for sort of a plexi-ish kind of sound, but a lot of people think plexi and they think, sort of like Paul Kossoff and Deep Purple and the heavier stuff. He's using Marshalls, but there's just a tiny little bit of crunch on it. It is quite clean, and you could practice this at home with your clean channel on whatever amp that you're using. But if you want that a little bit more authentic, use your bridge pickup and have a little bit of gain on your amp. Now, not so much. We don't want loads and loads and loads, but it's just that little bit of hair on its chest, so to speak. Just a tiny little bit, so you can hear it. The harder you hit it, the more it should crunch up. So if you play it gently, you can just hear it ever so slightly, but you dig in. Once you dig in, you should be able to hear it kind of get a little bit more angry. Right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of it then, and that's why you're all here. So this riff uses the technique that I spoke about at the start of the video, where he's hitting most of the strings and he's muting everything apart from the notes that the tab's going to tell you to fret. So we're going to split this into two sections. Now, notice above the tab, I'm telling you, there's like the little bridge, I call it a bridge, symbol above some notes, and then there's a V over some of the others. Now, the bridge means a downstroke, and the V means an upstroke, okay? So we're going to start with a down and an upstroke on the 7th fret of the A. So, again, I'm muting all the strings apart from that 7th fret on the A, and I'm going to go. Now, just a side note, in the verses, he only plays that once, not twice, and that would be done with a downstroke. So we've got... Then, I'm going to move to the 7th fret of the G. I'm going to play a downstroke, but bearing in mind, all my fingers, you see that thumb coming over? I'm muting the rest of the strings, and I'm going to go... So I've got... And then with my 3rd finger, I'm going to press the 9th fret of the same string. Now, all the fingers that are doing the muting should still be doing the job. So you don't have to do anything with the muting fingers. You just need to move that 3rd finger over to the 9th fret. So we've got 7, 7. Then we move to the G, and we play a 7 and 9. Then we're going to go back to the 7th fret that we started with and do a down and an up. Now you'll see a line of crosses, and that basically means you're covering all the strings and just doing a stroke, but you're not going to get a note. You're just going to get that noise. So after you've played that 7 twice, you're going to go with a downstroke. Now notice how the 7th fret on the G is with an upstroke this time. So the mute is catered for with the downstroke, and then as I come back up, I want to catch that 7th fret on the G. I'm going to come down again with another mute, then I'm going to come back up with the 9 like we did a couple of notes ago. So that whole first bar the end, we'll talk about that in a second. You've got 2 7s on the A, you've got a 7, 9, both with downstrokes. We'll go back to the root, which is E. Down and an up, you're going to do a mute downwards, an upstroke on the 7, a mute with the downstroke, and then a 9 on with the upstroke. Now, the back half of each bar is almost a lead into the next bar. So you're going to go back to that 7th fret, that E note, and you're going to play up, down, up. And you can hear it, if you know the riff well enough, you can hear it sort of getting ready for the next bit. I'll play that first bar in its entirety really slowly for you. Now you might be able to hear me catching some strings when I'm supposed to be muting them all and stuff, and that's part of the flavour. It's part of the charm of the riff, that it is a sort of bit rough and ready and a bit scruffy. So moving on into bar 2, we've got the 5th fret of the A string with the downstroke. You'll see a theme with this. It's all very similar from this point. The first bar of this riff is the hardest, and the rest of it is more just a moving bass note. So first note, we've got the 5th fret on the A string with a downstroke. I'm using my index finger. Now, some people in this riff, other people teach this riff and use an open string for this, and I don't think that's what he's doing. I could be wrong, but it doesn't sound as choppy when you use the open string. So this D, although it kind of feels like hard work and you're to-ing and fro-ing, I do think it's worth it for the sound. So you've got the 5th fret with the downstroke, then 7th fret on the G and 9th fret on the G, just the same, muting everything. So you've got back to the 5 with a down and an up, and then you've got the mute after it, just as we did in bar 1. Then you've got a 7 with an upstroke, downstroke mute, upstroke 9. Let's try all that bar so far. Just as before, we're going to finish the bar with up, down, up on the 5th fret of the A string. So that whole second bar looks like this. Now with my 3rd finger, some people use the thumb here, but I prefer to use my 3rd finger. I'm going to use the 7th fret on the low E string as the bass note, followed by the 7 and the 9 again on the G as the previous bars. So I've got 7, but because we're coming from 5 actually, we're going to use his 3rd finger on that first note. Then I'm going to use my index finger for those 7s this time, for down, up, followed by a mute, upstroke on the 7 on the G, then you've got another mute, followed by upstroke on the 9, and then to finish it, just as before, you've got up, down, up on the last 3 notes. So that whole 3rd bar. Now for the last bar, home stretch everybody, we're going to go to the 8th fret with his 2nd finger. Now, again, you could use the thumb here if you wanted. I prefer to use the 4-finger, sort of the finger per fret rule kind of thing that I always talk about. So we've got 8th fret with his middle finger on the low E with a downstroke. Then we've got the 7th fret on the G and then 9th fret on the G, just as before with the previous 3 bars. Then we've got a down and an up on that bass note again, which is a C, followed by a mute with a downstroke, upstroke on the 7th fret of the G, downstroke mute, upstroke on the 9th fret of the G, and then you've got those 8th frets just as before to bring you back round to the beginning. Let's glue the whole thing together really, really slowly. It took me ages to get this riff, but that's okay. I'd rather that you take your time and you do it properly. Probably the best course of action for you moving forward with this, if you're struggling with it, is just take one bar. Just take one bar, because the only thing as you get further into it, the more you'll notice it's just the bass notes that change. That first bar is the hardest, okay? And even if you're just going, and that's all you practice for a couple of weeks, it'll be well worth your time. Now, the scruffiness of it does get better the quicker that you play it, and that's why everybody that tries to play it always wants to play it at 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's all well and good, but I've had to untangle a lot of people that have brought this riff into my teaching studio, and the missing notes, and you know, some people will learn it where they'll play the single notes at a time, and I'd try and get the mutes in it, because it just doesn't sound the same. It doesn't sound anywhere near as cool. But the quicker you play it, the better it does sound. It is one of those that you'll just go round and round and round and round it. But it might take you a while to get, but that's okay. Take your time, but do it properly. So, how are you doing with that? Let me know in the comments. Is it doing your heading as much as it did my heading when I was learning how to play it? Above me, we've got the icon to subscribe to Practice Like a Pro. If you like what we do 3 guitar lessons a week of all sort of acoustic, electric, all sorts of stuff. Please do consider subscribing if you're on your own guitar playing journey. And if you want to learn something else, we've got a couple of other lessons here that you can check out. Until I see you next time, thank you very much. Keep practicing like a pro. Cheers.